Today I want to talk about big stories and small stories. How so often in life we focus on big narratives, big stories, when really, like, true life is kind of done in these small, little, intimate stories. So that's the main sweeping theme. Before we do that, I just want to read the scripture because we're in church, and so we'll do that first. This is out of the Psalms. This is Psalm 4, and this is the Message version because I'm a 90s Christian. So when I call, give me answers. God, take my side. Once in a tight place, you gave me room. Now I'm in trouble again. Grace me, hear me. Oh, next slide there. There we go. You rabble, how long do I put up with your scorn? How long will you lust after lies? How long will you live crazed by illusions? Look at this. Look. Who got picked by God? He listens the split second I call to him. Complain if you must, but don't lash out. Keep your mouth shut and let your heart do the talking. That's a great, concise line. Build your case before God and wait for his verdict. Why is everyone hungry for more, they say, more? I love this line more than anything. I have God's more than enough. I have God's more than enough. More joy in one ordinary day than they get in all of their shopping sprees. At day's end, I'm ready for sound sleep. For you, God, have put my life back together. Now, if there's two lines in this psalm I really want to focus on today, it's that I have God's more than enough. Such a beautiful line. And then that last line, you, oh God, have put my life back together. I made a commitment to myself when I went to rehab. We're getting to that part in the story, by the way. But when I went to rehab, my dad gave me this Bible. My dad's a Southern Baptist pastor. And this was, ultimately, the answer to my sobriety was Jesus anyway, because he would tell me that at least 10 times a day. But he also gave me a Bible, and he highlighted all of the Psalms for me. And he said, if you can just read these Psalms through from front to back, I think it would be a really good anchor for you. And so I actually did that. I was raging against that Southern Baptist identity at the time, but that was something I found great comfort in because, as you saw from that, it's like this crazy sort of wish-washy back and forth reality of, like, I'm with God, now I hate God, now I'm with God, now I'm scorning God, now I'm rabbling, right? There's all of these things, and that's really what your head feels like when you're in that space. And so I identified with it greatly, and especially that last line, you, oh God, have put my life back together. So my life used to be, again, about these big stories. That started for me when I was really young. I used to move around a lot. My dad was a Southern Baptist missionary, so we would move, like, I lived in Texas, South Carolina, Sacramento, Amsterdam, New Jersey, New York, and San Francisco, and that was all before I turned 14. And then I went to 3 different high schools. That had nothing to do with my father. That was just my bad grades. But I went to 3 different high schools. So I was always this, like, perpetual new kid. But one through line through all of that was music. I began playing music at a really young age, and I began writing songs at a really young age. And at age 16, by the time we moved to San Francisco, I played this massive early 2000s battle of the bands. It was called Showdown. And 80 bands from around the Bay Area joined. My band, called the Blue Kazoos, was the youngest group by 10 years. So we were these little kids with bowl haircuts at the time, when I had hair. And we played, these songs that we had written ourselves, and I sang in that band, and we ended up winning that battle of bands. And it was this insane moment where at the very last show, they tallied up, like, all the votes and stuff, and we hadn't been called by, like, third. They were like, 4th place is this band, 5th place is this band, and I was like, let's go home. This is just embarrassing. Like, we're not going to get placed. And then Mario Capitelli, who's the guy who was leading that thing, I still remember his name, was like, and the winner of Showdown, I think it was like 2006 or 2005, is the Blue Kazoos. And I could not believe my ears when that happened. And we went on stage, and as a weird result of this, a friend of a friend had invited this guy. His name was Neil Sean. He was the guitar player for a band called Journey. And Neil took a liking, never heard of it. Took a liking to this little band, and he signed us to what was called a production deal. And so at 16, I was thrown into the studio system, and we were recording in all these studios, like the Plant in Sausalito and all these cool studios around San Francisco. And that narrative was so cool to me. Like at 16, I thought, I've got it made. Like I don't need to study anymore, obviously. That's the third high school. And I'm going to be fine. Turns out that was not very true. We recorded a record. Neil and the manager of that band got in some weird fight. The end of that story is that I've still never heard those recordings, which is kind of crazy. Yeah, we spent like a year and a half. And when you're a kid, that year and a half is a really long span of time. It's like a lifetime, you know? Neil was like, I'm going to do the best to do right by you, so I want you to play in a band with my son. And his name was Miles. And Miles, to this day, is still a great friend of mine. Miles, if you're listening, I'm sorry, I'm about to run you through the mud. Miles was this guitar player who was absolutely extraordinary. He was just as good as his dad. But we played in this band that was called the Miles Shawn Experience. And so I was the singer of this band. And we opened for Journey a couple of times. And then we started playing this very odd circuit, which I don't know if any of you know exists, but there's this whole subculture of like Journey tribute bands that are named like Wheel in the Sky and like all these other like things. And we would go to like county fairs and we would open up for these Journey tribute bands. And then the final stop on this, where I call these wrong exit moments in life, where you're like, I think I took the wrong exit. How did I get here? Was we were playing on a Journey cruise. And I got food poisoning on a Journey cruise. And I had this big come to Jesus moment where I was like, I gotta get out of here. I don't want to be doing this the rest of my life. Playing with like Steve Jerry, who was the lead singer of Wheel in the Sky. Anyway, and so I went home, I woke up in my parents' garage, and I decided I needed to make a big change in my life. And so I looked up music schools because I knew I couldn't get into like a regular school, but I thought like a music school would take me. And so I found this school in Hollywood called Musicians Institute. And I immediately sent in an application, which was just like at that time, you didn't have you had cameras on your phone, but it wouldn't like send like a full video. It was like the first iPhone. Remember, you couldn't text from that, like a photo, you had to email it. So I had my dad film me on his iPhone, and I played guitar, and then right back, we got a message that said, we'd love to have you. And so I enrolled and began playing guitar there. And my dad told me, hey, when you move down there, we're not gonna be able to afford to both send you to school and cover your living expenses. So you're gonna need to get a job. And I just assumed, like blindly, like I'm going to school. This is what you always wanted from me. Everything's gonna be taken care of. No, on a pastor's salary, they did not have the money to do that. So he was like, you can go wait tables, you can do anything you want. But he's like, I also have this church. This guy reached out to me, and they need a worship leader. And if that's something you're interested in doing, I could give you his number and you could talk back and forth. And I was like, that sounds so much better than anything else. It's one day a week. Let's go. So I met with this pastor. And a foundational through line in my life besides music had always been a love of God. I genuinely loved Scripture. I loved God. I loved church. These were all huge things in my life. And I met with this pastor named Brad. And he told me, I'm starting this church in Calabasas. There's never been a church in Calabasas, which is kind of a wild thing. To this day, there's only one church in Calabasas still, and it's in the canyon to Malibu, but there is not a church in Calabasas. And we met in the Edwards movie theater, which was in the Commons. And the first week I showed up there, anyway, the long story, I'm trying to zip this down so that I'm not here all morning. Long story short, I get the job to do that, and the first week I come to LA, there's a huge row in the front, and it's all roped off, and it says reserved. And so I get on stage and I start playing music, and I can't really see anything. There are these weird, cheap LED lights that are shining on me. But I do see this guy who's like hugely tall. It turns out that was Lamar Odom, and then he sat down, and the rest of the seats were filled with the entire Kardashian family, like the entire family, and that is like a lot of people. There's like 16 seats or something, and they're all filled. And Brad shared with me, it's actually because of this family that we started this church. They want their kids to have an experience with Jesus. And then that's also when he told me, hey, we also need a youth pastor for this thing, and I would love it if you would do that. And I told him, like, I have no desire to do that. I'm doing my own thing. I want to play music. And he's like, well, it pays double what the worship leader position does. And I was like, I feel so called to youth ministry. I will be your guy. And that started this very weird moment in my life where I hosted a youth group in the backyard of the Kardashians' home for about a year plus. And I met my wife in that back. She was not a part of the youth group. Whenever I say that, people are like, what? She was a volunteer in the youth group. And I met Chelsea there. Her brother also helped me in that youth group. We had this really beautiful crew of kids. And some really outrageous things were happening, and this is just proof that like nobody ever, like if you grew up in a megachurch, nobody ever checks on what the youth pastor is doing, which is not a great thing. But we were kind of running our own isolated deal there and on Sunday mornings, and there were kids that were like literally coming out in this group. And as a young youth pastor, I saw nothing wrong with that, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. Like, look, this kid is being like the fullness of themselves. They never really caught wind of that, and so that was fine. But this grew a reputation of both, it's in the Kardashians' backyard, which is not a hard sell, and this is kind of a place we can say anything that we want. And so that thing grew like crazy. There were just all of these kids, and they were able to like hang out in hidden hills and get through the gate. We eventually got to a space where the Kardashians did not want us there anymore because it was just too many kids, and there were like cupcakes being thrown in the pool and stuff. But I became really close with Caitlin. And Caitlin was then identifying as Bruce, and I would just have these talks, with them before the youth group would start. And it was just kind of, a parent of two girls in the youth group, and we would talk over, like, he would have this, like microwave spaghetti was a big thing for that. I have no idea why, but they would always have these leftovers and this huge plate of spaghetti, and they'd be eating this huge plate of spaghetti, and we would just talk. And I would eat, I was a poor college student, and I was like, can I smell that spaghetti? About like 5 years into this, I went to seminary. I gave my life over fully to the magic that I experienced with these kids in this backyard, and that became the life trajectory. It's somehow, and I've done a lot of therapy around this. The number one question a therapist will always ask me is like, is it because of music? Like you had to let go of music? And I was like, that naturally. It's there's this phrase in the Gospel of Thomas where Mary is talking about giving birth to Jesus and being able to settle in the reality that she's doing something much bigger than herself. And what she says is, I was able to leave this world with the help of another one. And I really believe that, like, when I was with those kids and we were having these deep conversations in that backyard, I was able to leave one world with the help of another one. And something was humming along in all of this, which is that I also really like to party. And I was going out on the weekdays, and I was hanging out with people, and I was in a really, I played with these Journey people for a long time, and we drank heavily, and I just carried that through. And that hadn't become a problem yet, except for when I went to seminary, they make you sign two things in Southern Baptist Seminary. It says you're not going to dance and you're not going to drink. I signed that, but boy, did I do the opposite. That just gradually started growing in my life, and I couldn't really figure out why. I was dancing in this church reality on Sunday mornings, and then I was drinking during the week. And for a while, that hummed along just fine. I got married. We moved to Santa Monica. My wife is a kindergarten teacher in the Palisades. And so we made that move over to the west side so that we could be close to her. And I was driving up to Calabasas and Agora on the weekends. In Santa Monica, we experienced this really cool reality that, like, all of our friends kind of lived within like a 1-block radius. And they started coming over for this Bible study that we were doing on Tuesday nights, every other Tuesday. We called it Theology on Tap, where we would drink and we would talk about God. And that thing grew, and it grew. And then one day, a buddy of mine, Alex, said, hey, man, wouldn't this be like crazy if we just like started our own church out of this? And for him, that was just like this flyby sort of sentence. For me, I was like, that's a path forward. Like, I'm driving to at this point, the church had moved to Agora Hills. And I was like, I'm driving to Agora every weekend. I want to get out of this pattern. And so I pursued that possibility with a lot of vigor. I started putting it out there that I wanted to do this, and we got some support. My dad got wind of this, and he actually moved down from San Francisco to Los Angeles to help co-pastor this thing with me. And so we got a lot of like Southern Baptist funding. And I think, bless my father, I don't think he understood where I was at theologically at that point and, and where he was at. And we got to the same place and we kind of realized, ooh, we might be a little bit different on this. And that really came to roost when it's about 2015, and that church had been around for almost a year. We were growing. And I wrote this Facebook piece on Caitlin, because Caitlin had transitioned, and we were getting a lot of questions because we're a Southern Baptist community of what's Josh think about that? Like, where's this church stand on this? And so I wrote something I thought was just going to be like a conversation stopper, actually. Like, this is, a friend. It's a human being. And we stand with openness and full acceptance of this beautiful human being. And when I put down my phone, once I posted that, it did not stop buzzing for like 2 weeks. Like, I remember hitting my phone down after the fit, and it was just zzz, 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 zzz. And it turns out it had got, this is like a wild thing. Viral is like a normal thing now. This was 2015, and this was like a written thing. It was like 3 pages long. It was really long. And it ended up on the Washington Post, and like over 3 million people read it within that time frame. And it got us a lot of attention, and at first I thought that was really good. And then we got these phone calls from all of these churches in Los Angeles that had helped plant this church and had provided funding, and they said, we want to sit down with Josh. And so I got sat down. It was very biblical. It was 12 pastors. And I was 26 at the time. I was just a kid. And I have a lot of compassion for that kid in that meeting now. Because they drilled me with all these really heavy theological questions I had no answers to. I had no answers. They were quoting scripture, and they were saying really, really hurtful, harmful things that now I really understand come from a place of complete fear. But at that time, I didn't know how to answer. And I mean, if I could paint a picture of this for you, it's like this circle, and they're all going around in a circle, and I had nothing to say. And I felt terrible about having nothing to say. And I just kind of sat there, and I remember holding back tears, because in my mind, I was getting all these amazing emails and Facebook messages and texts from friends who knew nothing about Jesus and wanted everything to do with Jesus, because they didn't know that these two things could exist in the same place. And there was no way to convey this to this group of older pastors from this young 26-year-old guy to be able to tell them this. I left that meeting bitter and angry. And that's when my relationship with drinking really turned. My dad left that church. The funding left that church. We went from somewhere around like 150 people to like 25 people overnight. And I didn't have any other source of income. I had no other marketable skills. And so I just kept pastoring this church, and I kept showing up every Sunday morning. And it began to grow again, which was really cool. At the same time, there was this other church across town called New Abbey. And I was watching their trajectory as they were growing, because we were similar in age. Corey was about 2 years ahead of us. And I started meeting with Corey, and he was a coach for me. And he would sit me down, and he would help me with these huge conversations and these theological ideas, and he would give me sort of like ammunition in my back pocket, and I'd always leave from those meetings feeling like, yeah. But I was drinking a lot. And one morning, I went up on stage, and this was just, drinking had reached a point for me that I was actually physically dependent. I didn't know what that meant. All I knew was that when I didn't drink, I would shake kind of violently. And if I did drink, I would stop shaking, and my anxiety would go away. And so that pattern continued for about like close to a year of just kind of like maintenance drinking is what we call it in recovery, where you're drinking to basically not have a seizure. I didn't know that any of that was possible. No one tells you that when you have your first beer, by the way. And one morning I woke up, and I was just particularly angry, and I was particularly sad, and things at the church weren't going well. And we had this bar at the church because it was in a theater space like this. And I went behind the bar, and I would have to do this every Sunday. I'd have to take 2 shots to just not shake and hold a microphone, just like this, steady. And this particular morning, I drank more than those 2 shots. And I got up on stage, and I don't remember a lot. I do remember that people walked out. I do remember that people were angry. And I left that place, and I went to my garage, and I opened this huge bottle of vodka, and I was just pouring it down my throat when my garage door opens, and a truck pulls in, and it's the head of my board. And he walks out of his truck, and with such compassion, just goes, Josh, what is going on? What can we do? And I was like, I have no idea. I just know I'm in a place where I can't fight this anymore. I have no ability to hold this. And he's like, all right, well, let's just take the next right steps, and let's just do this thing. And they got me into a rehab. And this whole journey, just to make this story very short, because I don't want to get into the whole drunk-a-log of it, things got a lot darker after that. I went to the rehab. COVID hit, and so the church actually shut down as a result. I wasn't there. We had very little funding anyway, and so the board made the decision to shutter the church. And I got that news when I was at Betty Ford in Palm Springs. And I was about 2 weeks in, and I was doing okay. And then when I got that news, I was like, when I get out of here, I'm going to run it like you've never seen a human being run it. And I did. I got out. I went right back to my apartment in Santa Monica, and I started drinking so heavily. After 30 days in a very expensive rehab. Got to the point where I had to check into another detox, and then I went to another sober living and another treatment center, and that process went on for like a year and a half of just ping-ponging between places, being separated from my wife. We had a little dog named Baloo. We still have that dog. But I was apart from him as well. And it got to such a bleak place that I was in my apartment in Santa Monica, and I just remember looking over the railing of our balcony, and the Measure app had just come out on the iPhone, and I was measuring the space from the top of this balcony to the bottom to see if that was enough to end my life. And as I was measuring that, and my phone was open, I got this call from this guy named Robbie. And Robbie ran a sober living that I had kind of relapsed my way out of. And he called me and he was like, man, I picked up. And he's like, what are you doing right now? And I was like, dude, I got to be honest. I'm out of my mind right now. I don't know what I'm doing. And he was like, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to get in your car. And I was like, that's a wild choice, Robbie. And he was like, I want you to get in your car. I don't want you to turn on your car, but I want you to get away from that balcony. And so I got out and I went to my car and I just talked to Robbie. And I was finally honest with someone. Because I've been doing what I got taught in church, was just to be the shiny boy. Like, if you can just be shiny and you can just be, nice and gregarious and charismatic, then no one's going to ask any other questions about what's going on in you. And that's actually the way you're supposed to be. And he leveled with me so hard where he was like, man, I've always liked you, but I can't figure you out. Like, you're never honest about who you are, what you're going through. Like, if you're having a shitty day, you just need to say, I'm having a shitty day. And he's like, I'm going to let you come back to this house, but I have conditions. And I was like, go on, because at this point I didn't know where I was going. And he goes, you need to meet with a spiritual director and a therapist twice weekly, both. You have to pay for both of those out of your own pocket. You need to work a job, and you need to find a sponsor, and you need to work the steps. And I said yes to all of those things. And from there, that's where that big story ends, and a bunch of really small stories pick up. That instead of it being this big, sexy story of preaching drunk or working with Kardashians or playing with Journey, I was showing up day to day in a room with 6 dudes who had just gotten out of prison. I was the only person who hadn't. Sharing a moldy bathroom and going to meetings twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day. Working with a sponsor in one of those other houses, taking out the trash in that environment, trying to work this really cruddy job to just pay the rent of that and the rent of my regular life, because I was still married, thank God. And just showing up day by day by day. And I did that pattern and put my head down and just worked for like a year. And I remember this very distinct moment where I was like, I think this might be working. I was sober for almost a year, and my brother, he got in this motorcycle accident a couple of years ago, and he tore his aorta, which is like, the only reason I know that is because he got in an accident. People who know medical stuff are like, whoa. He had to get these stents put in, and those stents, there's always something wrong with those stents. And so he's constantly having to go to the hospital. And I showed up for him one day where he's like, I tripped, I fell, I don't feel good, I need to go to the hospital. And I was like, cool, I'm going to meet you there. So I met him at Cedars. And when I was in my shakiness, right, I was afraid to reach out my hand for anything. Like even that right there, that's insane. So it used to be like this, and that was a key giveaway that something's wrong with Josh, right? So I'd always have my hands in my pocket, or I'd always just be like doing things with my hands so that no one could see that. And this nurse comes over, and it's during, like, again, COVID times, so there wasn't room in the ER, so we had to be out on the street. And he comes out with this tiny cup of water, which would have been my absolute nemesis back in the day, like to hold that little cup. And he hands it to me. He says, "Give this to your brother." And he hands it to me, and I take it with my two fingers like this, and I just go this, shoo, and it's steady. And I was like, whoa. And I took the cup, and I handed it to Brendan, and he drank the water. And in that tiny little moment, it was like all these little stories that I had been doing came together in a big one. And I went, I think this is building to something, because I'm capable of just that, of just giving my brother this tiny cup of water so that he can drink and take a pill and get into that ER and get well. I kept working like that. I kept working like that in treatment environments. And then people began to kind of notice, like, I would just talk with people, I'd have conversations, and we'd end up talking about spiritual things, which is what I like to talk about, even when I was drunk. And so I'd find people in these treatment environments, and we'd be having these deep conversations in a corner, and they'd be like, "Guys, we got to get to group. Josh, you have to stop talking to people. You're supposed to be, like, taking out the trash here." And I'd be like, "Okay." And my buddy Mike, who opened up an IOP, saw me doing that one day, and he was like, "You know what? I think you should, like, be working with people." And I was like, okay. And so, like, 3 years ago, I started working with people one-on-one as a spiritual director, talking about spirituality. And that was 3 years ago, and that's just continued today. But the biggest thing that happened to me, and this is where these small stories lead up to this one big story, is that steadiness continued. The more that I kept at it, the more that steadiness revealed itself, and the more I was able to be at home in God's more than enough. And my wife got pregnant, which was a huge journey. We've been trying for about a decade with a lot of false starts and stops. And I was about a year and a half sober when she was born. And I was in the hospital with her, and we named her Grace. And when she was born, the doctor called out, "It's a girl." And I was standing right there, honestly, like stunned out of my mind. Like, what is going on here? And he hands this little child over to me, and in the same moment where I was shaky trying to grab that little water cup, I grabbed something much bigger. And when Grace went into my arms, I was steady, and I held her. And not to get too corny or cheesy with this, but it dawned on me right there that I was in a moment in my life where I could hold something called grace again. Not just in this human form, but also just this idea of grace. And that's just continued and continued as she grows. She has this phrase that she always likes to say, which is just, "Hold me, Daddy," or "Hold you, Daddy," is what she says. Like, she's going to hold me. And then I'll scoop her up and pick her up. And whenever I do that, I'm just reminded of the gift that it is to be able to hold her. It's these small rhythms that lead up to really, really big things in life. And I think when we're focused on that big picture, on wherever we're trying to go in life, whatever life we want to get back to, or imagine life that we want to get to so that we'll actually be happy, the truth is that happiness is found in all those small little steps, like that 6-man room and that moldy bathroom, all these different little moments that I have now in my life that I count as treasure, not as difficulty anymore. They've added up to something really collectively beautiful. This is the first time in my life at 5 years now where I started taking a deeper look. I don't know if I can even say this, but I'm not going to be. I'm still obviously going to be here, but I'm transitioning away from a tech role here, just to be speaking more and playing more music and doing that kind of stuff that I love. I'm taking a deep look at my life and all these little stories, and I decided I'm going to write. This is what I'm just saying this out loud so that it happens. So just be with me here. And I love what Britt said. Please be with me in this dream. I want to write a book. I want to call it "Preaching Drunk," stories of God where God shouldn't be, and neither should I. And just these stories of redemption in treatment environments, in detoxes, and in rooms of people trying to get better. I'm taking these steps in my life because I believe that these little stories add up to something really big. So with that, I want you to get back in your groups, and I want you to cover this. Thank you. What small story or rhythm do you need to practice this week?